The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of St. Mary's Hospital, casting long golden beams across the polished tile floors. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm of traffic and movement, people rushing to their destinations without pause. But inside the waiting area, behind those towering windows, the air felt heavy with despair, thick and suffocating. Among the weary faces etched with worry and hurried footsteps echoing through the corridors, one voice rose above the rest, broken, trembling, and desperate. A young mother, her clothes torn at the seams and faded from too many washes, clutched a teddy bear that dangled from her arm by a single worn thread. She held her sick child close to her chest, the little girl's body limp and fragile against her. Her knees buckled beneath the weight of exhaustion and fear as she fell near the reception counter, her voice breaking as she cried out, "Please, someone, please save my daughter." It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a scream of a soul breaking under the weight of helplessness, a raw and primal sound that cut through the sterile atmosphere of the hospital like a blade. People turned to look, some with pity creasing their foreheads, others with indifference glazing their eyes, but none stepped forward to offer comfort or aid. She was invisible to most, just another struggling soul in a world moving too fast to care, too consumed with its own problems to notice the suffering right before it. But in that moment, fate placed someone in the hallway who was never supposed to be there. A man whose life was filled with riches, power, and privilege beyond most people's imagination. A man whose decisions moved markets and built empires, whose signature on a document could change thousands of lives. His name was Adrian Cross, one of the wealthiest men in the country, and what he witnessed that morning would change him forever. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Comment below to tell us why stories of hope matter to you. Adrian had only come to the hospital for a quick board meeting about a new medical wing his foundation was funding, a tax-efficient philanthropic project that his advisors had assured him would enhance his public image. He had no intention of stopping in the waiting area, no plans to interact with the everyday chaos of hospital life. His life was a carefully managed schedule of luxury cars with leather interiors, private jets that whisked him from meeting to meeting, and appointments that never waited for anyone. Time was money, and his time was worth more than most. But as he passed the counter, his polished Italian shoes clicking against the floor, he froze mid-stride. His sharp eyes, trained to spot opportunities and threats in boardrooms, landed on the woman kneeling on the cold floor, her body hunched over in defeat. She was holding a fragile little girl whose cheeks were pale as porcelain and whose small chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths that seemed to require every ounce of her remaining strength. The mother's name was Marissa Lane. Life had not been kind to her, had in fact seemed determined to test her at every turn. Once a bright student with dreams of becoming a teacher, of shaping young minds and making a difference, she had been abandoned by her partner when their baby girl Sophie was only a few months old. Since then, she worked 3 cleaning jobs, scrubbing floors in office buildings late into the night, often skipping meals so her daughter could eat something warm. Poverty clung to her not just in her torn jacket and worn shoes with soles coming loose, but in the way her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, in the dark circles beneath her eyes, in the premature lines etched across her young face. Yet her eyes told a different story entirely. They burned with fierce love, the kind only a mother fighting for her child could carry, a love that transcended circumstances and refused to surrender even in the face of impossible odds. For weeks, Sophie had been ill, a fever that would not break no matter what remedies Marissa tried, weakness that left her unable to stand or play, and a cough that grew worse by the day, rattling her tiny frame. Doctors had confirmed she needed an urgent, expensive treatment, the kind that required specialized equipment and expert care. Without it, her chances were slim, a clinical assessment that felt like a death sentence to Marissa's ears. She had begged every charity in the city, knocked on every door she could find, but all she collected were sympathetic smiles and whispered apologies, empty promises that evaporated like morning mist. And now, at the hospital desk, she was being told once again in that professionally detached tone, "We can't start the treatment without the payment." Her cries echoed through the sterile hallway, raw and unfiltered. "Please, she's just a child. Take me instead if you must, but don't let her die. I'll do anything." Her voice cracked as Sophie whimpered faintly in her arms, a sound so weak it barely registered above the ambient noise of the hospital. Adrian felt something stir inside him, a sensation unfamiliar and uncomfortable, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. His empire was built on hard contracts, tough negotiations, and an unshakable belief that every man and woman controlled their own destiny through willpower and determination. But as he looked at Marissa and her fragile daughter, he saw a truth he had ignored, buried beneath years of success and insulation from hardship. Sometimes people didn't fail because of laziness or weakness. Sometimes life simply crushed them under burdens too heavy to carry alone. He could have walked away. He could have told himself it wasn't his problem, that he had his own responsibilities and couldn't save everyone. But instead, he found his steps moving toward her, drawn by something deeper than logic. When Marissa lifted her tear-streaked face and her desperate eyes met his, she didn't see a billionaire in an expensive suit. She saw another human being who might still have a heart beating beneath the armor of wealth. Adrian spoke quietly to the nurse, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and in moments the resistance faded like smoke. "Prepare the child for immediate treatment. All expenses will be covered under my account," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument or hesitation. The nurse, stunned into momentary silence, nodded quickly and rushed to comply with the unexpected directive. Marissa gasped, clutching Sophie closer as if afraid the promise would vanish like a cruel dream. "Why?" she whispered through her sobs, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this for us?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. His gaze fell on Sophie's tiny hand wrapped around the teddy bear, the symbol of innocence she clung to even in sickness, even as her body failed her. Finally, after a long pause filled with unspoken memories, he said, "Because no child should pay the price for what the world failed to give, and no mother should beg for mercy that should already be hers." As the hours passed slowly, marked only by the movement of staff and the beeping of distant machines, Sophie was admitted and doctors began the life-saving procedure. Marissa waited outside the room, trembling with a mixture of fear and hope, unable to sit still, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. Adrian stayed too, his expensive suit and polished shoes completely out of place among the worn plastic chairs of the waiting area. He sat beside her in silence, his presence a strange comfort, an anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Memories haunted Adrian as he waited, flooding back with unexpected intensity. Long ago, before the fortune and the fame, he had grown up in poverty himself. His own mother had faced countless nights of hunger just to keep him alive, sacrificing everything so he might have a chance at something better. He had buried those memories under layers of wealth and success, never allowing himself to feel that pain again, never looking back at the struggling child he once was. But Marissa's voice had torn down those walls, reminding him of where he came from and of a love he once knew, the love of a mother who gave everything without expecting anything in return. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity compressed into a single afternoon, the doctors returned with news. Sophie's condition had stabilized, the treatment was working, her vital signs improving with each passing moment. Relief flooded Marissa's face, washing away the tension and fear, and she collapsed into tears. This time tears of gratitude, of overwhelming relief that her daughter would live. She turned to Adrian, unable to find words strong enough to thank him, her voice failing her completely. But Adrian wasn't finished. He learned about Marissa's struggles in the conversation that followed, how she juggled jobs that left her exhausted, how rent consumed her small income, leaving almost nothing for food or medicine, how every day was a battle just to provide her daughter a chance to live beyond mere survival. His heart, hardened by years of business battles and corporate warfare, softened in the face of her resilience and quiet strength. Quietly, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He arranged for Marissa to receive steady financial support, not as charity that might wound her pride, but as a job within his foundation where her work would have meaning. He promised her flexible hours, enough to provide for Sophie without sacrificing her own health in the process. He also set up an education trust fund for Sophie, ensuring she would never be denied opportunities because of poverty, that her potential would never be limited by circumstances beyond her control. Marissa, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered, shook her head in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. "You don't even know us. Why go this far?" Adrian finally allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of warmth in longer than he could remember. "Because once someone gave my mother and me a chance when we had nothing, and it changed everything. I think it's time I return that gift." The story of Adrian Cross and Marissa Lane spread quietly at first, whispered among hospital staff who had witnessed the extraordinary scene, then carried by those who understood its significance. In a world often clouded by greed and indifference, one act of kindness had ignited hope like a flame in darkness. A billionaire, once untouchable and remote, had chosen to bend down and lift someone who had fallen, to see the humanity in suffering rather than turn away. And that choice had not only saved a little girl's life, but had also rewritten the future for an entire family, creating ripples that would extend far beyond that single day. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Marissa held Sophie close in the hospital room. Her daughter's tiny breath was stronger now, more regular, her color returning to her cheeks like spring after winter. For the first time in years, Marissa felt something she thought she had lost forever: safety, hope, and the belief that miracles still happened, even in a world that seemed to have forgotten kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Unfold Narrative. Stories like this remind us that compassion is more powerful than wealth, and a single act of kindness can change lives forever.